With me now is Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California. He is a member of the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, so this new DHS plan that is at least portions of it being made public will keep children waiting in custody, with reunifications only happening once the parents' deportation proceedings are completed. What's your reaction to that?
It is not acceptable that right now there's still over 2,000 babies and kids who were ripped away by the Trump administration from their parents that still have not been reunited. The American Pediatric Association has said that this kind of trauma can affect the kids' brain development and affect them for the rest of their lives. We need to put these kids back with their parents as soon as possible.
And then, of course, according to this plan, once the parents have to, be processed, we've heard reportedly there's a real shortage, of attorneys being able to represent people, and that process is very lengthy. What do you anticipate in terms of how long this wait would be for this process to be completed?
There is a lot of chaos that started because of this awful family separation policy. By the way, I agree with Republican Congressmember Mike Kaufman that Stephen Miller, the White House advisor who was the architect of this policy, should resign. In terms of process, we're asking very basic questions that the Department of Homeland Security still can't answer. So 3 weeks ago, I asked Secretary Nielsen in a letter with other members of Congress, how do you make sure when you release these children that they're not being released to child molesters? How do you reunite these kids? How do you keep track of these kids? They still haven't been able to answer any of those questions. And we still don't know how they know that babies are connected to their actual parents. None of these questions have been answered.
What does this mean to you when it says there are improvements or they're working on modifications for their database? How does that translate to you?
Yeah. It translates that maybe for new kids, they have these improvements, but for the initial 2,300 or so, what it tells me is they had no plan in place. They did not have these linkages that they needed, and they can't answer these very basic questions, which is quite horrifying. What it might mean is that some of these babies and kids may never be reunited with their parents because they don't know who they are.
Now, I want to ask you about what happened earlier in the week on the House floor Friday when you chose to play audio from that ProPublica recording of the cries of young children and one little girl, saying she is pleading for a phone call to her aunt. And then you were met with some real resistance by the Republican in charge of this session. Let's watch some of that moment.
What must that sound like?
The gentleman will suspend.
For what reason, Madam Speaker?
The gentleman is in breach of quorum.
Cite the rule, Madam Speaker.
Rule 17 of the House.
There's
that
no
prohibits
rule that says I
Rule
can't play
17. The gentleman will suspend.
Why are you trying to prevent the American people
Rule
from listening to what it
17
sounds
of
like
the
in a
House
detention
prohibits
facility?
the use
These are
of that
babies
device.
and kids in a detention facility. Why do you not let the American people hear what they are saying?
So she said it prohibits the use of that device. Did you challenge that? Is that indeed the case, that you were in violation by playing that audio? And secondly, what was your objective?
I thought it was important to put into the congressional record the horror of these kids and what they're experiencing from the Donald Trump administration's family separation policy. And I also wanted the American people to hear the cries of anguish from these children that were ripped away from their parents. And it was not a breach of any House rule. In terms of decorum, nothing says that I can't play the cries of children who are separated from their families. And by the way, why are we even talking about decorum when what we're seeing is a functional equivalent of kidnapping? There's much more at stake than this decorum.
And is that largely your kind of concern when you were talking about, there is a great concern that without some real good bookkeeping prior to this new promise of a database, that there are some children who will never be reconnected with their families, but somehow they're in the United States, they'll be dispersed, some are already in foster families, and it's your accusation and that of so many others who are calling this kidnapping?
Absolutely. I remember when our two kids were born, both times the hospital went to great lengths to make sure that they knew who the parents were, who their infants were. And there's no evidence here that the Trump administration went to those lengths, that they actually connected who the babies are to who the parents are. Because they did, they would be telling us, as well as the news media, the procedures they put in place. My great fear, they had no procedures, which means these little kids and these babies will really be lost from their parents because they don't know how to connect them.
And babies and those that are nonverbal, unable to express who their parents might be if the numbers or whatever data is taken doesn't correspond with reaching their parents?
That is correct. And what the Department of Homeland Security has said is that a number of these parents may already have been deported. So now how do you reunite those parents with their babies or infants, especially if the little kids can't explain who their parents are?
Congressman Ted Lieu, thank you so much.